You're listening to the April 22nd, 2016 edition of the Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup, the weekly podcast that's focused on how the world of cybercrime is impacting business. The Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Hey everyone out there, I am Jeff Peters, here as always with Matt Leifus, Surfwatch Labs writer. On this podcast each week, we bring you the top 5 trending cybercrime events, advisories, and legal actions based on Surfwatch Labs data and analysis. So we'll jump right into it with the top cybercrime event from the past week.
Coming to number 1 this week, we have Blizzard Entertainment. Now, this is a little disheartening for me because I thought that this group was gone, eradicated, there are several arrests, but it involves Lizard Squad, which is kind of a bummer because I can't stand these people. Anyway, last week, Lizard Squad targeted Blizzard with a DDoS attack. Nothing new there, that's still their same MO. Blizzard's Battle.net service was the target. Lizard Squad claimed credit for the attack last Thursday, as well as taking credit for an attack against the World of Warcraft servers. It appears these attacks took place over Lizard Squad's stressor. I can't remember the exact name of it. I think it's called Lizard Stressor.
I think, that sounds right.
The gaming servers for Blizzard and World of Warcraft, they were running normally a couple hours after the attack, so this was discussed heavily. Probably because, Blizzard, there's a lot of gamers out there. Lizard Squad always gets a lot of attention because, of Xbox and PS4. And I remember that Christmas when they hacked it and I was pissed. I'm not going to lie about that. But, it appears that they're back. So they could, speculating, they might maybe have some new members because they had quite a few convictions and arrests. But they have been back in news lately performing some DDoS attacks.
Yeah, and I know on Surfwatch Labs blog, insert plug for Surfwatch Labs blog there. Matt, you wrote an article about DDoS attacks, and there's a chart in there kind of showing the level of, if you want to call it, chatter around each event. And this Blizzard DDoS attack looks like about the number 3 biggest DDoS talking point of the year.
Yeah, a lot of gamers, a lot of attention, and again, anytime it just seems like every time Lizard Squad's involved, they get a lot of attention. Breaking down that article a little bit more, according to Surfwatch Labs data, the consumer goods sector has been the most impacted by DDoS so far in 2016. There's another bit of information out there that made news earlier this month. A record-setting Layer 7 DDoS attack was identified, and it reached 8.7 gigabytes per second. Now, if you know anything about your traditional DDoS attack, normally they reach like 100-some. But with a Layer 7 DDoS attack, it's different, just because of the way it works. I won't get all super technical. Just know this. Layer 7 DDoS attacks, they don't require the same amount of resources as your traditional DDoS attack, which means that they don't need as big of a botnet to pull off a similar impacting attack. It could be a lot of trouble for companies out there.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised that consumer goods was the most talked about sector. I guess that makes sense. I think government actually had the most individual targets, which when you look at hacktivism and DDoS, that fits. But yeah, there was definitely a lot more chatter and focus on the consumer goods sector attacks, which makes sense because those are a lot more public. It's impacting the consumer, so there's naturally the news focuses on that more.
And there's that financial aspect too. The longer that they're down, they could lose, a lot of money.
Another story that got quite a bit of news this week was another DDoS attack. We'll be talking about DDoS this whole podcast, sounds like. The Janet Education Network. And this attack started on Friday, April 15th. And there was a wave of DDoS attacks that targeted this network. And just a quick back up, what Janet is they provide services to over 18 million people for research and educational purposes. And then I think these attacks continued throughout the weekend for a few days, and I think on Monday there were still DDoS attacks being observed. So there wasn't a whole lot of news. I mean, it's just a DDoS attack. There's not a ton about it, but the Education Network did provide a brief statement saying that there were, quote, issues accessing the website and that blocks were being implemented.
Now, this isn't the first time this Janet Education Network has been in the news for a cyber attack, right?
A few months back, I think it was probably in December, that they suffered a pretty prolonged DDoS attack that made quite a bit of headlines. I think it was around the beginning of December last year. A lot of times with these DDoS attacks, you do see that, same thing with like Blizzard and gaming. You see a lot of the same kind of targets being hit again and again.
We haven't talked about any type of denial of service attack for a while. I mean, ransomware has probably been the biggest thing, and
it was probably like a year and a half ago on the podcast. There was a lot of, well, maybe that was before the podcast. Anyways, yeah, if you go back a little bit, there was a lot of those DDoS extortion attacks for a while. A lot of these, websites basically being publicly extorted with these DDoS attacks, and attackers demanding ransoms. But yeah, it seems like not everyone, but there's been more of a shift towards the ransomware, at least with the big public attacks that we hear about a lot.
Jeff, you just made me feel pretty old there. A year and a half ago, before the podcast, we were such young men back then. But it's a good point. A lot, things do change clearly, over time. Well, they can change pretty fast.
I remember the months. Like, I remember I wrote an article, it was like in February or March, and there was a whole bunch of different attacks. Sites like Elance and stuff were being targeted, and, they were just like piddly little, they'd want like $100 or something, to stop the attack. I'm getting so old, I can't remember whether that was that 2014, 2015? I can't remember.
It happened. That's the point. It happened. Coming in number 3, we're going to talk about the Newark Police Department. According to the Newark Police Department, a virus infected its computer systems, which took the police department 4 days to fix. And here's a quote from a spokesman for the police, the Newark Police. Through the efforts of the city's and the division's IT, as well as the assistance from the Essex County Prosecutor's Office, New Jersey State Police, and federal authorities, we were quickly able to get the system cleaned and operational in 4 days. The big thing with this, people were talking about this, it was trending. They say that there's no evidence of a data breach. So I think the big thing here is, you have the New York Police Department. Anytime someone like that gets hacked, it makes big news, and you should talk about it. But it doesn't seem like any malicious activity, besides the fact that a Trojan was found on their computer systems, took place. And they, were very quick to mention that to everybody.
Yeah, and it did disrupt services. Like you said, it took a few days to fix, and the public safety director, Anthony Ambrose, he confirmed that the department staffers were unable to access the systems for several days while they worked to clear the servers of the virus, and that the virus temporarily locked down the servers, blocking access to the computer program used by the department to track and analyze crime data, and also the program used to dispatch police and emergency officers. All right, moving on to number 4, we have the Catholic Archdiocese of Denver. They suffered a data breach of its payroll systems in October 2015. This breach was found by a third-party software provider. According to the software provider, hackers had accessed the payroll system and looked at the W-2 information on about 80 different individuals, and this includes past and present employees. And this data included information on the employees, as well as spouses, dependents, insurance beneficiaries, all that kind of stuff that would be associated with payroll systems. Yeah, so in total, the database contains data on 18,000 people, but according to this third-party provider, only about 80 individuals had their information looked at, and then it was reported that fewer than 50 individuals have reported that someone filed a tax return in their name. Kind of a smaller level payroll breach, but it's interesting that it's happening all over, even at these archdioceses and everywhere.
Yeah, it show everyone's a target. If you have any type of systems, you keep data. It doesn't matter who you are, obviously. And moving on, number 5, we have another tax-related fraud event, I'll call it. We're going to talk about the Baltimore City employees. Apparently, an unknown cybercriminal, so it has not been identified, stole the personal information on an undisclosed number of Baltimore City employees. We might hear more about that in the future. Time will tell. This information was used to file fraudulent tax returns. The breach was discovered last week. According to a spokesman for the mayor of Baltimore, it was not immediately known how many employees were affected by the breach. And here's an actual quote from him. We are currently trying to assess the scope. As we determine who has been affected, the city is certainly going to take the appropriate steps in terms of providing credit monitoring and other services. So time will tell. Obviously, tax season is come and gone. There's going to be people who haven't filed taxes yet. We're going to still continue to hear about some of these W-2 related and tax related breaches. But I would imagine as time goes on, we're going to have a little lull period of maybe won't hear about this as much, but it's still, it's still April, so we're going to be hearing about this a little bit more.
Moving on to the top advisories from the past week. One of the big ones everyone was talking about was WordPress. There's always something going on with WordPress, and Surfwatch Labs put out an advisory on this to its customers. There's a PHP web shell that's being used in WordPress attacks. And various security researchers have seen an increase in this C99 web shell activity in February throughout March. So web shells are known as post-exploit tools, and they can give an attacker backdoor access to the web server itself. This is from the Surfwatch Labs advisory. This particular variant, like I said, it appears to target WordPress. And one way that it accomplishes this is by first uploading the web shell through a file upload page and then using a local file include weakness to include the web shell in one of its pages. So if you need more information on that, there's a lot of articles and stuff out there you can check out. Some of the recommendations that we provided were that users should keep web application plugins and browsers up to date with patches and releases. Security personnel should consider thorough security testing of web applications as well as develop an intimate understanding of their web server content. And then if any new files are found there that were not put there by developers, they should obviously be removed, and the web server should be further scanned for malicious files and other non-native code. Ensuring the network monitoring solution is scanning for web shells of all types is also recommended, as some web shells can cause more harm than simply the C99 variant. So just your friendly reminder, if you got WordPress stuff out there, to stay up to date on all that.
Yeah, stay up to date. WordPress is a pretty heavily targeted system, so yeah, that's pretty good advice. In another Surfwatch Labs alert that was released this week, we're going to talk about Jigsaw ransomware.
Is that the name of the guy from Saw? Jigsaw?
That's right, Billy the puppet from the Saw movies. Yeah, and it's so creepy. So this got released, and then if you have the Surfwatch Labs app, you can get a notification whenever we release, alerts and things like that. And all of a sudden, I read it, and there's this giant picture of that puppet, and I'm like, "Whoa, okay, yep, that's interesting."
We'll send it straight to your phone. Give you nightmares.
Exactly. So moving on past that, and I'll be able to sleep at night. It's okay. Jigsaw is a new ransomware variant, and this has been very popular. If you've been paying attention to the podcast, we talk about new ransomware. It seems like every week there's new variants and things coming up. So this is a new ransomware, and it's called Jigsaw, like I said, because it's based off of that puppet from the Saw movies. It issues a ransom demand with this picture of the puppet, and it gives a time frame for the victim to pay the ransom demand. So what it says is, in a 72-hour time frame, if the user does not pay the ransom, they'll delete all the files. And another thing they'll do is, if that user tries to reboot the computer, they'll erase the files. So it's kind of, it's not really nice. And it's using a scare tactic. It's saying, like, if you don't do it by this time frame, we're just going to erase all your stuff, and, you're not going to have anything.
Yeah, and I think the longer that they wait, the more files get erased too, right?
And
kind of clever.
Yeah, it's very clever. And like Jeff said, the longer you take to pay, it will erase files. So it's kind of a nasty little ransomware. Security researchers believe this malware is spread through a file download from a free cloud storage service. Upon infection, the ransomware immediately creates copies of all the user's files, encrypts them, and then deletes the originals. All encrypted files are appended with a .fun extension at the end of each file name. In other observed attacks, these files have also been appended with .kkk, .btc, and .gws. So that's something you can look for to see if you're infected. However, if you're getting a ransom message and you see this, then there's a good chance, hey, you already know. Surfwatch Labs, we have the usual recommendations with any type. When it comes to ransomware, you should back up your files, update your software, educate your employees and organizations about, the risks of phishing emails and things like that. But with this particular ransomware, it can be decrypted, which is awesome. And here's how you do that. First, you want to go open up your task manager and look for the Firefox and Dropbox extensions. So firefox.exe and drpbx.exe. You want to look for these processes and shut them down. After that, you want to download the Jigsaw Decryptor, which if you just Google, you'll find it. And from here, you unzip the archive and launch the application, and that will decrypt all the information. So that's a nice little piece of information to know, and just keep that in mind. And another thing with ransomware, guys, look, I know, like, you know, there's been some conflicting messages, and we've seen hospitals, for instance, like pay ransoms and things. Like, I mean, I get it. In a sense, I understand, because you need to get that things back, all that information back, but there's no guarantee that the criminal is going to be compliant if you pay it. So just keep that in mind.
I do wonder, though, if more criminals, I mean, obviously this attack has got a weakness because you can just decrypt it. But I wonder if more people are going to start doing stuff like this, because before the podcast we were talking about like sales techniques and fear of loss, and this is like, I mean, if you're looking at your computer and files are getting deleted, you're just
right.
That panic, you got to do something.
Yeah, it's a little different. If it's your personal computer and you're just, it only affects you or your family, it's a little different. If this happens to an organization, you have a limited amount of time to act, or you're going to lose everything.
I can just imagine some of my friends, like non-tech people, just sitting at work, just with a panic.
Just freaking out. They're just going to call in the rest of the week because they don't want to deal with it.
Moving on, we have another advisory that came out this week. A new adware called Faster Internet is making headlines, and it's because of the malware's unusual activity. Not only does this adware blast a victim with ads, it takes a screenshot of the victim's desktop and uploads that picture online.
Creepy.
Yeah. All sorts of creepy stuff going on here. Security researcher Lawrence Abrams, he said that the problem is that when this program is installed, the user may have confidential documents, websites, or programs open that will now be included in a screenshot and uploaded to these scumbags. For example, what if you had your password manager opened, or your bank account opened, or you're doing your tax return?
Yeah, I wonder, when I was reading into that, I didn't see the actual purpose for why it does that. I mean, these are all just things that could happen, but I didn't see anything about why it actually does that, why it actually takes it. I mean, maybe that is the goal, to see if they can catch like a screenshot of some information.
Yeah, so that's not really a major thing, but a lot of people were talking about it just because we hear so much about adware and a lot of the problems that it's causing, and this kind of is just another privacy issue along with that. So a lot of people were talking about that this week.
Coming in number 4, we're going to talk about QuickTime for Windows. And here's another situation where a program is no longer receiving security updates and people might not necessarily know about it. Apple has made the decision to no longer support QuickTime for Windows with security updates, and security experts are urging people to immediately uninstall QuickTime for Windows. Christopher Budd from Trend Micro, and he's their Trend Micro's communications manager, had something to say about this, about Apple's decision to do this, and especially because this decision came as 2 new zero-day vulnerabilities were found affecting the software. And here's what Christopher Budd had to say about it. Both vulnerabilities would require a user to visit a malicious web page or open a malicious file to exploit them, and both vulnerabilities would execute code in the security context of QuickTime Player, which in most cases would be that of a logged-in user, end quote. Apple has released a guide for uninstalling QuickTime for Windows, and you can view that on their website. One of the main issues here, Jeff, though, is Apple didn't do a whole lot to let people know that. They didn't issue a whole lot of information like, hey, we're going to stop supporting this.
Yeah, from my understanding, this zero-day initiative told Apple about it, and I believe they were just waiting to find out what was going to happen, and then they heard back, oh, yeah, we're not going to do anything because we're done with that.
Great.
So, yeah, I definitely want to make sure that you're uninstalling that or taking other precautions if for some reason you can't uninstall it right away.
And coming in number 5, we're going to talk about Uber. So Uber, again, is a transportation company that a lot of taxi cab services really don't much care for. As I'm watching, Jeff had to move his cell phone and had a look of fear in his eye as it almost dropped it. Oops. So Uber released information in its first ever transparency report that the company shared about 12 million passengers' information with the U.S. government. The information was requested by U.S. regulators and law enforcement agencies. The company shared this data between July and December of 2015. Here's a statement Uber released about this event. Of course, regulators will always need some amount of data to be effective, just like law enforcement. But in many cases, they send blanket requests without explaining why the information is needed or how it will be used. And while this kind of trip data doesn't include personal information, it can reveal patterns of behavior and is more than regulators need to do their jobs. It's why Uber frequently tries to narrow the scope of these demands, though our efforts are typically rebuffed.
Yeah, and this story actually ties into one of our legal stories this week, so I'll jump right into that one. One of the big legal stories that got a lot of headlines this week was Microsoft is actually suing the government over the fact that they're basically accessing customers' data without informing their customers. They said that this is unconstitutional. So Microsoft filed a lawsuit last week with the Justice Department over the Justice Department's practice of essentially what they do is they ban tech companies from informing their customers about the snooping that's going on. So Microsoft said that nearly half of the government's 5,624 demands for customer information, and that was over an 18-month period. So nearly half of those demands over those 18 months came along with gag orders that prevented the company from informing its customers of the action. And in addition, 1,752 of those gag orders came with no time limit. So it wasn't just, hey, don't say nothing for 6 months or for a week. It was, don't say nothing ever, unless we tell you otherwise.
Wow.
So obviously there's just another government versus tech pending big issue here that we got to kind of get to the heart of.
Right.
You know, and the Wall Street Journal, they said that this lawsuit really raises a fundamental question of how easily and secretly the government should be able to gain access to individuals' information in the cloud computing era. There's definitely a whole lot of privacy battles going on the last 6 months especially.
So, Jeff, now that was the number 5 trending legal advisory for the week. It tied into what we were talking about with Uber, so Jeff skipped down and did that one. Thank you for doing that, Jeff. That made a lot of sense.
You're welcome.
We can be polite to each other, right?
You're also quite handsome.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Wow. What a day. We have the top trending legal advisory had to do with the largest trade secret verdict ever. Oh, it's one of the largest.
According to Reuters, they said it was one of the largest public trade secret verdicts.
And this had to do with the medical software company Epic Systems. So, Jeff, if you wouldn't mind diving into that, because you definitely have the info on this.
Yes, I did apply at Epic back in the day, and I'm pretty good at math, but I totally bombed there. I was so overconfident about their little stupid math, the little math sheet you had to do. I just was so arrogant and cocky about it, and then I didn't even get halfway through it.
Oh, wow.
Oh, man. Anyways, Epic, which is based out of Wisconsin, they are one of the largest companies for electronic health records. And recently, they were awarded $940 million in damages in a lawsuit against India-based Tata Consultancy Services. Now, this consultancy services company, they're saying that they're going to appeal the ruling, and the trial judge actually said that it's quite likely that he's going to reduce the awarded damages, so it's not going to be $1 billion, but still, it's a significant chunk of money. The jury awarded $240 million in compensatory damages and $700 million in punitive damages. And there were 7 different claims, including breach of contract, misappropriation of trade secrets, unfair competition, and unfair enrichment. But to boil it all down, essentially, Epic is claiming that they stole these documents and information, and then this information was used to benefit Tata Consultancy Services Med Mantra software. Now, the company denies that it was used this way, but apparently the jury ruled the other way.
The jury clearly saw it's found otherwise.
Yeah, so just if you want to know a little bit about how this attack happened, TCS ended up having access to some Epic systems because of this contract a couple years back. And when this TCS access was supposed to be over, they were supposed to deactivate the account, but instead the account was mistakenly marked expired, and this allowed this TCS employee to reactivate his account, and then he used it during 2013 and 2014, and he also gave the credentials to a couple other people. And apparently they ended up downloading over 6,000 documents and more than 1,600 files. So that's kind of why this whole trade secret thing started because someone kind of forgot to revoke access.
Oops. $900 million, that's a lot.
Yeah, and it'll get reduced. A lot of times that's what happens, but yeah, it's a
heck of a starting point, though.
Yeah, it's a good negotiation point.
Yeah, right. Coming in at number 2, if for those who remember, P.F. Chang's back in 2014 suffered a data breach. A previous lawsuit against P.F. Chang's was dismissed previously due to a lack of standing, but it was revived in the 7th Court. The judge wrote that the case was similar to another data breach ruling from the court.
I'll jump in there, Matt. I think it's Remigius versus Neiman Marcus. And that's the ruling happened last year. A lot of people were talking about, basically the judge said, because a lot of these cases were getting thrown out, and then the 7th Circuit said that, well, hey, just because there's not immediate harm that you can prove, obviously if they stole your information, it's because they want to do something with it. So a lot of people were speculating that Neiman Marcus ruling would potentially affect other things, which apparently it's doing here.
And here's what the ruling states that we're talking about. They describe the same kind of future injuries as the Remigius plaintiffs did. The increased risk of fraudulent charges and identity theft they face because their data has already been stolen. These alleged injuries are concrete enough to support a lawsuit. And again, that's what based off the ruling, that's the logic that's being applied here. It is plausible to infer a substantial risk of harm from the data breach because a primary incentive for hackers is, sooner or later, to make fraudulent charges or assume those consumer identities.
We've heard a lot of speculation about if this Neiman Marcus ruling would impact other rulings. And now, this is the same circuit, the 7th Circuit, so obviously they're kind of quoting themselves.
Yeah, right.
Interesting that it's coming back a little bit here. Moving on, we have a couple other data breach lawsuits. One of them is Sprouts, which apparently is a Sprouts farmers market.
I remember talking about this, actually.
Yeah, they were one of the companies recently that had a W-2 breach, which we've talked about a lot. I think it was back in March. An employee fell for a phishing scam. Someone impersonating a higher-up basically said, hey, we have 21,000 employees, and I need every single employee's W-2 information, send it over my way, and bam, bam, bam. They got everyone in the company's W-2 information. So anyways, there's a lawsuit over this now. A former employee filed this proposed class action lawsuit against Sprouts Farmers Market over this breach. According to the plaintiff, she and her husband were unable to e-file their 2015 tax return because a fraudster using her stolen information had already claimed her tax return, which seems like we say this same sentence about 3 or 4 times each podcast. And yeah, and many, like we've said many times, a lot of different companies have fallen victims to similar schemes targeting W-2 information, because with that information, it's fairly easy to monetize, versus, say, a credit card. You can get a big tax return and do things with it.
Yeah, and then our last legal advisory for this week, there's a family services agency, and they're being sued over a data leak. So this lawsuit was filed in Ontario Superior Court after 285 people were being investigated by this family and children's services. These 285 individuals had their information stolen, and it was posted to a Facebook page. This agency, which provides child welfare services to those south and west of Ottawa, had information stolen from an online portal for board members earlier this week. The portal was, quote, easily accessed by an individual without any obvious hacking skills. This is according to the plaintiff's lawyer. According to CBC News, the claim calls for $25 million in general damages, $25 million in special damages, and $25 million in punitive damages, as well as other related costs.
And that story wraps up this week's top trending events, advisories, and legal actions. Before we wrap up the podcast, though, we have our funny story of the week.
Today we're going to talk about Ashley Madison. Since its highly publicized data breach last year, Ashley Madison is now facing class action lawsuits. This is pretty standard practice, as we just pointed out in the last story. That breach happened
earlier this
last week. This lawsuit has a twist. Anyone who joins the suit has to reveal who they are by using their real name. this makes perfect sense, right? If you're part of a lawsuit, you should identify who you are and establish how you're involved in the lawsuit. The fact that the lawsuit is against Ashley Madison complicates things because this means anyone who joins the suit essentially has to admit to their spouses and loved ones that they were a member of Ashley Madison. And just to recap, if anyone out there is unaware, Ashley Madison is a service that helps men and women, and let's face it, mostly men, from the stories we saw, cheat and have affairs with other people. My heart's just broken for these poor souls. It really is. U.S. District Judge John Ross ruled that the plaintiffs had to use their real identities to join the suit. Before that ruling, 42 plaintiffs joined the suit under pseudonyms, and here is why. To reduce the risk of potentially catastrophic personal and professional consequences that could befall them and their families. Just don't cheat on your family and loved ones, I guess, but,
Or if you do, take some
responsibility for it, or take some precautions, I guess. If you want to
say sneak around a little bit.
Sneak around a little bit better. Well, either way, if you're gonna get caught, don't. Or if you're gonna do something like that, don't get caught, or just make the better moral decision and don't do it in the first place.
All right, and that'll do it for this week's Surfwatch Cyber Risk Roundup. As always, this podcast is brought to you by Surfwatch Labs. Surfwatch Labs helps organizations and service providers quickly establish a strategic cyber threat intelligence operation that drives more effective use of their tactical defenses. If you want more cyber threat intelligence news, check out surfwatchlabs.com or Surfwatch Labs' new blog at blog.surfwatchlabs.com.